Welcome back to Politics Nation. To talk more about the video showing George Zimmerman just minutes after he shot Trayvon Martin, let's bring in Lou Palumbo, a retired police investigator and now director of the Elite Group, a private security agency, and Jonathan Capehart, opinion writer for the Washington Post and an MSNBC contributor. Today, he's writing about George Zimmerman's crumbling version of events. Okay, guys, let's take a look at the entire tape. I want you to tell me what you see. Roll it. Lou.
At this point, it's quite obvious that they have Zimmerman in custody.
Now, he's getting out of the car.
Correct.
Unassisted.
Correct.
Nobody in the back with him.
Fully ambulatory, handcuffed and in the state of arrest. And apparently the police officers are having some type of dialogue.
Now, watch this.
Right.
He's touching Zimmerman with his bare hands.
No gloves.
No
That's
gloves.
correct.
This is evidence.
Well, apparently there was no real concern by the police officer that there might be any type of contaminants, especially in a day where we live with AIDS and other infectious diseases. The other thing I found interesting is that you're watching.
So that's unusual.
Highly unusual. The other thing that's a little unusual is that they appear to be conducting or finishing this search of him in their command as opposed to out in the street. Normally, you would have done this in the street before you put him in the back of the car.
But wait a minute, Lou. They are continuing searching him in the police station, not in the street, and he just killed somebody.
That's correct. That's correct.
Now, that's very unusual.
Highly unusual.
All right. What does that mean? They know him or they're comfortable with him? I mean, what do you get from
I think procedurally they're a little remiss. If you watch him now, he seems to be walking quite well for an individual.
They're walking and kind of letting him walk his own way.
Absolutely.
Which is very unusual.
That's exactly right. Normally you would accompany him by holding or grasping his arm to have control over the subject.
But what does that say to you, Lou? They're not holding his arm. He's just walking. He's
what it tells me is that procedurally there's a little bit of a problem with the police. I'm not sure that it lends itself necessarily to anything that's collusive in the relationship between Zimmerman and the police. But these are just a little bit of irregularities. The thing I find also interesting is the guy that was just alleging that he was beaten within an inch of his life and found it necessary because he was so beaten to use deadly physical force seems to be quite okay and moving around.
Now, all of this, look at this walk. Look at how he's walking alone. Doesn't appear to be limping, doesn't appear to be in any way rattled, doesn't appear to be traumatized. Here's a man who said he was beaten within an inch of his life, who just killed somebody.
Well, I can tell you something.
30 minutes before we're seeing him on this tape.
Reverend, I can tell you something else that's rather interesting. I just listened to a witness to this, indicated that he believed that Zimmerman got from on top of Trayvon, and when he got up, there were no visible injuries, and he was moving about quite freely and comfortably.
But that's what a witness you just heard.
A witness, I just heard a witness's statement. And these are not consistent with injuries that would justify the use of deadly physical force.
Now, let's go slow, Jonathan and Lou. Let's get specific. First, Zimmerman's nose. It was said his nose was broken. Let's look at his nose. The scene says, quote, Zimmerman, this is statements made from the scene, Zimmerman was bleeding from his nose, and that was the police report. And the Orlando Sentinel reported this week Zimmerman suffered a broken nose at the scene. But let's focus again on the video. Shot less than an hour after Trayvon was killed, less than an hour after Zimmerman sustained these injuries. Look at his nose.
Well, I have a point I'd like to make out that's maybe not to upstage it, but more significant.
Right.
If you have a broken nose and profuse bleeding, do you see any blood down the chest of this individual?
Or the clothes.
Right.
Well, that's what I'm referring to, his clothing, his chest. Nothing anywhere. You don't see anything consistent?
Here's the clothes. Here's the nose. A broken nose, you can't stop from bleeding that
Basically,
quick.
you cannot.
And you certainly would have blood on your clothes.
Absolutely.
But they didn't change his clothes.
But we should focus on something else.
Look at the nose.
If he broke
Look at the nose. These are three different shots, three different angles. Neither of those angles look like a broken nose, or you really don't even see a bruise, and you certainly don't see blood. And I've never heard of an arrest where they let you go change before you go to the police station from a murder scene. Am I right, Lou?
Not in my 39 years of being around the law enforcement community. The thing, Reverend, is obviously Mr. Zimmerman is attempting to cover up this homicide he committed. And unfortunately, there are witnesses coming forward right now that are contradicting many of the statements that he made, including statements his father made about being brutally beaten to the degree that it was requiring him to use deadly physical force.
And the report says that he was treated in the back of the car, but clearly
no blood.
No blood. And clearly it does not seem like any physical injuries. And Jonathan, you've been following and writing on this case from day one, at least as close to it as it went national. And you've been told this man was beaten savagely.
We've all been told that, Trayvon jumped on top of him. Trayvon first punched him in the face, knocked him out, knocked him down on the ground, pinned his shoulders back, pinned his arms back, banged his head several times into the sidewalk, into concrete.
Walking very straight.
But for those folks who are saying, might want to say, you can't see that there might be blood because the image is grainy. Someone who has had a broken nose, someone who is bleeding from the nose, someone who had lacerations to the back of their head would have bandages. Less than 35
Especially
minutes.
Since they had first aid.
Right, exactly. First aid in the back of that police car he arrived in. There are no bandages on his nose. Nothing inside his nose.
Let me go slow so
nothing
people
on the back of his head.
He was given first aid in the back of the car.
Right.
If he had a badly bruised nose, let's known a broken nose, they would have bandaged him.
Exactly.
They would have done something. They would not have just wiped his nose and handcuffed him. Mind you, you're going to handcuff a guy with broken limbs and let him just walk through the police station. Doesn't make a lot of sense.
There's another interesting development with the eyewitness. The eyewitness has spoken and indicated that this confrontation with Trayvon occurred on the grass. And apparently, based on a police report that I was able to review, there were grass stains or moisture consistent with him being on a lawn, not concrete.
Not concrete.
Correct.
So what you reviewed, he was on a lawn, not concrete.
Correct. Right.
Now, let's focus on the head. The Orlando Sentinel reported this week a police source said Trayvon climbed on top of George Zimmerman and slammed his head into the sidewalk, leaving him bloodied and battered. Now, but back to the video. Does it look like there's any lacerations or evidence of cuts or bruisings on his head in this video?
No, not that you can see in this video. And still, again,
let's go close. Look at it.
Nothing consistent with the injuries that were alleged.
Now, Lou, how important would this be if you were testifying at trial?
Extremely important.
It would be very important.
There are a lot of holes in his story at this point, Reverend. That's the bottom line. There are no injuries that he sustained consistent with the use of force that he employed.
Now, here's 3 different shots of the head, just like I did the nose. Here's 3 different shots. And on all 3 angles, we don't see any obvious injuries, lacerations.
Irregularities.
Irregularities.
Correct.
Thank you, sir. I'll use your term since you'd be the one that would be the expert witness. And he would need some of these injuries, 1, to be consistent with the story told, and 2, to justify why you would use deadly force and kill someone and claim it was self-defense.
The other thing, Reverend, that if he had sustained these protracted injuries that he alleged, the law enforcement agency, as we have done in the past, would have taken photographs of him so that at some point in time, if necessary, they would have been presented to a grand jury to further support his claims of self-defense. But I do want to point out one other thing with this case that people may not be mindful of. It is my opinion that this incident or this contact with Trayvon was precipitated as a result of the poor judgment of Zimmerman. It is not an affirmative defense. You cannot claim self-defense if you instigate the confrontation.
Right.
And basically, Trayvon had the same stand-your-ground rights as this individual did. This was a man who had no identification from a law enforcement agency, no credential that would allow him to confront anyone. In fact, if you review the tapes, he was directed or it was suggested to him, pick semantics here, however you want to say it, by the 911 operator who operates under the training and supervision of a law enforcement agency not to proceed. He had no legal authority to confront Mr. Martin.
Well, let's go a step further. Let's go to the clothing. Because clearly, if you see how he's dressed, there's nothing identifying him as anything. If I'm Trayvon, I don't know if I'm not being attacked by a criminal.
That's exactly
because you see how he's dressed. He's not a law enforcement officer. He's not even a registered watchman, but he's certainly not dressed in a way that would suggest to any authority. But also, let's look at the police report identified Zimmerman as, quote, the subject in the red jacket at the crime scene. Yesterday, the Orlando Sentinel reported police took Zimmerman's clothing and packaged it for crime lab analysis. But back to the tape. That looks like a red jacket to me. Wouldn't there be blood on that jacket? And when would they have taken the clothes?
They should have, for the purpose of analysis, to determine if that was his blood or the blood of Trayvon, for example. You know, as the story is going and continuing to develop, I'm hearing that the shot was discharged while the two of them were rolling around on the grass.
Right.
So obviously there was an entry wound, which we'd like to verify through autopsy, potentially an exit wound, which would be consistent with some bleeding. So obviously you'd like to find out the entry wound angle, if in fact there was an exit wound. If you want to also determine the distance in which the shooting occurred, and we're able to do that through forensics.
Wait a minute, now back this up for me 1 second. Where's my video guy? I want to back it right up just a few. Right, okay. Here you got it open. There's no blood. You see the green shirt? The green shirt is open. There's no blood. So even if somebody wants to say the red jacket, you couldn't see blood, here's green. You'd see some dark spot. You'd see something.
You would see something.
If there was blood, certainly from a bloody nose. So, I mean, the story they're telling, it just doesn't fit the tapes. And obviously, not only didn't the Martin family know the tapes existed, I don't think Zimmerman and them thought about these tapes before they told their story.
I also want to mention one other thing.
Lou, sum it up for us. As you mentioned, this one thing. Sum up what we've gone through.
If there were injuries consistent with a brutal beating that required the use of deadly physical force, and in this instance, a deadly weapon, a handgun, wouldn't you think there would have been required some type of emergency medical treatment at a hospital facility? This guy's walking around the precinct like he's never experienced anything. He doesn't have any bumps, any bruises. There's no evidence of any bleeding.
Doesn't seem like he's traumatized, nothing.
Precisely. There's nothing consistent with his claims or the claims that his father made. In fact, his father further exacerbated the situation by lending itself to this whole issue about the weapon, which is another tangential issue to this whole thing. He was not authorized to carry this weapon in this capacity as a neighborhood watch person. The same way the New York City police, auxiliary police, who are in uniform, are not authorized to carry weapons. They specifically forbid it. He precipitated this. There's a little bit of a vigilante mentality attached to this individual, in my opinion, and this is the fruition of it.
Lou Palmetto and Jonathan Capehart, thanks for your time this evening, and thanks for your help in walking us through this tape. New focus on the one person who can make or break this case. Special Prosecutor Angela Corey. Will she make an arrest? Stay with us.